I actually want to discuss this incredible rebellion that is going on all across the U.S. and in the context of this CIA, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Now, and this is really the week to discuss it because the two are so linked. I mean, the police here and the way the military operates around the world and the way in which the U.S. government and the bourgeoisie always finds a way to put a cover on it, study it thoughtfully, come up with some recommendations that are responsible, and let the criminals off the hook. And there will be commissions to study police brutality and police attacks. You can bet on it. There have already been lots and hundreds of them over the years. I mean, we could look back. Herbert Hoover in 1929 set up a police commission to study police bribery and entrapment and torture and fabricating evidence. It was in 1929. Or we could talk about People versus Martinez in Los Angeles, which was about the chokehold and it being a mechanism to kill. And police after that, that was 60 years ago, 1954, were supposed to be barred from ever using the chokehold. So the idea of that when it comes to the police, or when it comes to the U.S. military, or when it comes to the CIA, there's no charges and no indictment. There can be hundreds of killings. There can be devastating photo evidence of horrendous torture that would give you nightmares, does give you nightmares, and yet no one is guilty. It's really stunning. There can be videos of a man being killed by chokehold, and everyone in New York City has seen it, and no one in the police force is guilty. So this is what is roiling and really leading to a rebellion of millions across the country. And whether it is right here in New York and the tens of thousands are in LA or Oakland, or the biggest demonstration that Rockford, Illinois ever had was this afternoon, 100 people in the streets. So, Rockford, Illinois. I mean, that's just an example. When we say 170 cities, you picture how this is impacting some of the small communities and neighborhoods and schools. It's the way the capitalist system works, and it's true not just this year, it's always been true. Police murder, the whole judicial system, the courts, the attorney general, the district attorney, the police commissioners, they act together to say not guilty. And then they set up commissions to study it. We could also, the Kerner Commission and the Walker Commission, and I mean, really, it's extensive. And what will these commissions do? They will actually, along with wringing their hands, they'll reward the police with more money, better training, new cameras, and all to be more professional. So the commissions play an important role in defining a problem that this is the excesses of a few. And they do it with great publicity, and they get everyone in the ruling class and in the media talking about it. And they'll also, at the same time, this rally, Blue Lives Matter. Well, if you hear Cheney this week and the CIA defending as great patriotic, the CIA torture, a great patriotic role, that is Blue Lives Matter, in reality, on the international scale. So what was released was the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence released what was officially called CIA Detention Interrogation Program, their study of it. It's in short, even in the media, called the Torture Report. It was 5 years in the making. It's a 6,000-page report, cost $40 million. The final report was actually approved 2 years ago, December 13, 2012. And they sat on it for 12 years, or for 2 years. And then 8 months ago, they actually voted to release part of the report. And they finally released it because this Congress is on the way out, and they know the next ones coming in aren't going to release it. So they really were propelled because it lets them off the hook. See, the main conclusion was that torture was not effective. That is their main conclusion. It didn't work, and it was not successful in getting information. And then their other conclusion, even more important, was that the CIA had misled and given false information to government officials on the extent of this program. So that really says everyone else is not responsible. The CIA didn't really tell us what was going on. So that's why it's important to look at what's not covered. What they released is less than 10% of the actual report. It's only a summary. They decided not to release more than 2,000 photos, and there's a long court suit of any number of organizations demanding the release of the photos. But they say no, that would be endanger U.S. security around the world, and you can bet it would. This study also focused only on the CIA's use of torture, and it focused on 2 private contractors who were blamed for setting up the entire apparatus. So there's no government officials that are really to blame for all this. Now, but it is an effort to lay the blame solely with the CIA, not the Bush administration or the leadership of both parties at the time who voted and were filled in on this, or the U.S. judiciary, which time and again voted and approved Guantanamo and the secret prisons, and that prisoners had no rights, and they were all fully cognizant of what was happening. And now we hear none of them knew. Of course, there's no blame for even the major corporate media. The New York Times is spending pages now covering this. But at the Times, they would always use a polite word, abuse. There was some abuse of prisoners going on. We're not talking about torture and rape and hanging people upside down and freezing them and waterboarding one man 183 times. So, of course, the media is let off the hook, too. The most important thing it doesn't include is U.S. torture and secret prisons that are operated far beyond the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. The U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy and a whole series of Department of Defense agencies. The CIA is only one of 18 intelligence agencies. The study reported only 1 prisoner death. Now, CBS 60 Minutes reported in, I think it was 2005, that there had been 108 prisoner deaths in U.S. custody that they could account for at that time. So where'd 107 known people go? The U.S. held about 270 prisoners at Guantanamo. President Obama said his first act on coming into office would be to close Guantanamo. But according to UN investigation in 2008, there are more than 27,000 prisoners held in more than 100 secret prisons around the world, 17 ships that were used as floating prisons. So 99% of all those being held were held not at Guantanamo, but in other prisons all over the world where there's no accounting.
Right.
Now, it's so important to look back on the way in which those who exposed this were treated. I think what's enraged so many people is Ramsey Orta, who recorded the July 17th murder by Officer Pantaleo, the chokehold, He's the only one who has been indicted on a weapons charge 2 weeks later. Imagine that. Felony count. But the same thing is true in the CIA revelations. Thousands of prisoners, the most horrific forms of torture, and the only person who was indicted and is actually serving jail time now are the whistleblowers. The only CIA agent who was jailed for this whole torture program is the whistleblower who confirmed its existence. A former CIA operative, John Kiriko, is in prison, and he's charged with a crime for exposing that he worked for the CIA from 1990 to 2004, and then he stepped forward in 2007 and confirmed to the media the first details about what the CIA was doing, and he really gave concrete facts. So in 2013, and this is under the Obama administration, he was prosecuted under the Espionage Act for revealing classified information and sentenced to 30 months in prison, which he's still serving. And this was after the Obama administration refused to prosecute any of the government officials who designed or authorized or took part in implementing the torture program. And as a matter of fact, there is now what they call a war on whistleblowers. This current administration has charged more people under the Espionage Act than all previous administrations put together. And it's an effort to stop whistleblowing and WikiLeaks and all of that, shut it down. Now, even more horrendous was what befell Private Chelsea Manning, a trans woman, really a heroic activist. They're serving 35 years for releasing videos and U.S. diplomatic cables of crimes, of real crimes. And for this, she herself was tortured, kept in absolute isolation, solitary confinement, everything possible done in an effort to break her. Now, along with the secret prisons, in Iraq, for example, the U.S. held over 100,000 prisoners in a huge detention system. And the famous Abu Ghraib, which came out in 2004, and the whole world saw these horrendous videos of torture and humiliation and stripping prisoners naked and abuse and killings. Those images were also what led to this commission, because the outrage it created around the world was a demand that it be dealt with. It became a howling international issue. There were UN reports, there were reports from other countries, there were the release of these photos. The Center for Constitutional Rights, for example, filed and joined several of the cases together and charged Bush and Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld under what are called universal jurisdiction. So there are a whole number of U.S. politicians that cannot visit Spain or Switzerland or Germany or Canada because they might be arrested on war crimes charges, because there are real conventions, and once these indictments are charged, any local prosecutor could implement it. And this also is something that totally frustrates the U.S. ruling class, because they think they rule and can ride the world. And during this whole time, of course, U.S. government is lecturing the whole world on human rights, and does so on a regular basis. But it no longer has that effect. Now, I was thinking of really this rebellion, the demonstrations that have just rocked the U.S. and the demonstrations that I participated in when I was invited to Pakistan on the imprisonment of Dr. Afia Siddiqui, who was a Pakistani woman who was kidnapped, disappeared, tortured for years, and then put on trial, brought to the U.S. and put on trial here, and sentenced to 86 years. And in Pakistan, from one end of the country to the other, there were tens of thousands of people in the streets. They shut the roads, the bridges. There have been protests that have blocked and shut it down for months at a time, the Khyber Pass, so the U.S. and NATO supply trucks couldn't get into Afghanistan. That's a kind of rebellion that has seized whole parts of the world. And it wasn't just about Afia Siddiqui, it was about the tremendous number of prisoners and assassinated and disappeared and unaccounted for in Pakistan. And the drone attacks, which are unrelenting. The drone attacks are another example. The U.S. found, well, the prisons aren't so good. Then they're left with, how do they account for all these prisoners? So instead, now, they fire a drone. They had a hit list. 47 people were on their hit list. And so far, they've killed about 1,100. So it's like a 95% are civilians, people who had no connection even. And all of these hit lists, we should just remember, even at Guantanamo, 93% of the people at Guantanamo, by U.S. estimates, turned out they had no connection to anything. They were just people bought and sold and handed over for bounty. That didn't mean they weren't tortured, though, once they were in U.S. hands. So I'm raising all this because these are struggles that as we can feel the energy here and how the whole population begins to see what is happening. This is what's happening also on a world scale. And the CIA and the Army and the Navy and the Air Force and the militarized police, they really are all arms of the capitalist state. And the role of these commissions and inquiries is to make it seem that this is a nation of law that is based on great respect for human rights. And that is an absolute lie. Now, there are lawyers who, at this point, are stepping forward and talking about the UN Convention Against Torture and the UN Convention on Enforced Disappearances, and demanding that states prosecute and bring to justice those who engaged in torture. That's another important part of this commission, because if it was really just two independent contractors for hire, then who's going to be brought before the justice? It's talking about impunity. Now, even U.S. apologists, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has called for prosecuting officials responsible for the torture program, saying it violated international law and treaties against torture, to which the U.S. is a signatory. Now, will Ban Ki-moon do anything to enforce this? No. But all of this adds enormous pressure on U.S. wars around the world. Of course, the Justice Department has so far refused to initiate any prosecution, except against the whistleblowers, because they understand, and this is also part of every status of forces agreement anywhere in the world, anywhere the U.S. has troops of occupation, they force the country where the occupation is taking place to sign a status of forces agreement. What does that mean? Regardless of any crime that is committed by a U.S. soldier, they cannot be prosecuted by any local law. They're above that. So this is a global rage at the kidnapping, at the secret rendition, at the targeted assassinations, at the torture. It's a rage across the U.S. that is unprecedented, and it is radicalizing a whole generation into actions that I think none of us could have even predicted 2 weeks ago, what we're seeing in the streets now. And the problem for the whole capitalist system is that they can't subdue the people of the entire world. And just as we see the New York City Police Department, when there are tens of thousands of people in the streets who are just determined to shut it down, they seem absolutely weak and ineffective. When the demand is put forward, shut it down, then the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge and the Holland Tunnel and the West Side Highway and the East River Drive on the same night is shut down. That's just an example, but it is for us, I think, a really important and small example, as it was for the people of Pakistan to shut down the Khyber Pass and to say, sorry, no equipping of the U.S. war machine. So we should look at these examples and really take heart and join our voices of the jail killer cops, jail the war criminals, indict the whole rotten system, shut the whole system down. The whole damn system is guilty as hell.